everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I'm here today for the second episode of talking through my shelves, and I chose to talk through my favorites shelf. It doesn't encompass all of my favorite books, but it encompasses kind of some multiples and favorite authors and some books that I'm not even sure I'm going to keep, which I'll get into a little bit later. All right, so I'm going to start with classics. I've got two Frances Hodgson Burnett books. The Secret Garden, which I'm not a huge fan of this edition. It was one of those books that I got on discount online because I was trying to get a nicer version of this book than the edition that I had at the time, which was a really small, very worn out paperback. And I'm not a huge fan of this one because it's got the original typeset, which is super tiny, and also the texture of this book is quite strange. It's kind of soft, and I'm not a huge fan of the way the coloring looks in person. What I was hoping was something closer to this, which is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I love these editions. This is a Penguin Puffin Classics edition, and I really would love to find The Secret Garden in a similar size and style to this one. So this is just a placeholder for hopefully getting, and I have read this one and I have not read this one. This is on my list to read. I have seen the film and really want to read the book. I love Hodgson Burnett's writing, so those are on there. This is Stiffed by Susan Faludi, and I have owned this book since the late 1990s, early 2000s, and I haven't read it. I'm a little bit worried that I've left this book so long that I'm not even going to enjoy it when I read it. But it is a feminist interpretation of American men, and like the betrayal of the American man is basically what this book is. So it shines feminism's insights into various corners of masculinity. And I can't believe it, like I haven't read this. It's kind of ridiculous that I've owned it for this long and never read it, but I've kept it, so I do mean to read it at some point. And I also have In the Darkroom by Susan Faludi, which is a memoir about her relationship with her father. And I think the first place I saw this was on Brian from Bookish's channel, and he wasn't hugely fond of it from what I remember. But I was just fascinated with the premise of this book, and I know Susan Faludi is a very, very famous feminist. I don't know if she still is, or if that was kind of her moment of writing her books. She also wrote a very famous feminist text called Backlash, I believe. So I know of her books. I just haven't read them yet, but I do plan on it. Next, let's talk about my favorite novel, which is The Diviners by Margaret Laurence. So I read this in 2018, and it is still my favorite novel. Years later, I haven't read anything that's topped it. I did not read this edition. I read an edition from the library, and then I bought this book after that. So that's kind of something that is a way that I curate my collection, is that I do tend to read a lot of books, especially by first-time authors that I've never read before, from the library. And if I love them, then I purchase them. And I actually specifically picked this edition because it has an afterword by Margaret Atwood. So Margaret Laurence and Margaret Atwood were not quite contemporaries. They were very close, like they were kind of writing at the same time, but Margaret Lawrence's life was much shorter than Margaret Atwood's, and she didn't reach the level of fame that Margaret Atwood has. But I personally like Margaret Lawrence's writing better than Margaret Atwood's. It just suits my style of reading, the type of reader I am, better. I stand beside this book being my favorite, and along with that, I have some other Margaret Laurence books. So this is a collection of short stories which is set in the same fictional town in Manitoba as in The Diviners. So I read this a couple years ago, and I enjoyed the stories. There was nothing in here that blew me away, but they were nice and they were interesting. And I love the cover of this book. I think it's a really beautiful edition. So that's kind of why I've kept it, even though I'm never planning to reread these. I also have The Stone Angel by Margaret Laurence. So obviously this is a very old paperback edition. I have not read this one. And this one is also set in that town. So Margaret Laurence didn't have a huge output. I believe she wrote about 12 novels in her lifetime. And could be more than that actually, but I know that there's about 6 to 8 of them that are set in this fictional town. And so those are the novels that I'm most dedicated to reading. And so this one is one I think that I found at a secondhand bookstore at some point. This is The Life of Margaret Laurence by James King. So this is a biography, and I have read this. I read it many years ago before I'd even read any of her books. Or no, maybe I had read A Jest of God. I think I'd read one of her novels and I read this. I've kept it because I want to reread it because I don't really remember much about it. And then along with this one, I have Dance on the Earth, which is Margaret Laurence's memoir. So she wrote this later in her life, before she passed away, obviously. And so this is like, really high up there for me because of course she wrote my favorite novel. So I'm very interested in reading her own. I know she wrote actually quite a bit of nonfiction, which I haven't delved into at all. So interested in doing that in future. Okay, so the next series of books that I have are 2 by the artist Judy Chicago. So this is Through the Flower, My Struggle as a Woman Artist by Judy Chicago. And this book was very, very important for me in the development of myself as an artist. I was a young, late teens, early 20s artist trying to figure out how to make my place in the world without a lot of female, even at that time. So this is the late 90s, early 2000s. Women artists were not at the forefront, and it was very hard to find information about them. And I found this and I read it on a bus on the way to New York City to look at art with my classmates, and it stayed with me, and it's really important in my development as a person. And so I want to reread this soon. And then the other one I have of hers is Beyond the Flower, the autobiography of a feminist artist. And so this is a little bit more, as it says, it's not unlike this one, which is more of a memoir. This one is kind of encompassing more of Judy Chicago's life and career as an autobiography. And she is still a very prolific artist making amazing art right now. So, I'm sure she'll write more books that are about her career and her life in future. And I will plan to read all of them because she's a wonderful artist that I really admire. Okay. There's 2 here that kind of are in a different category, so I'll talk about them together. This is Goddesses in Every Woman, A New Psychology of Women by Jean Shindoa Bolen. And this is another one by Jean Shindoa Bolen. This is Crossing to Avalon, A Woman's Midlife Pilgrimage. So this book has some extremely beautiful passages about living your life as a woman. And I actually owned this edition previously, and a friend of mine was going through some tough times, and so I mailed it to her. And then I came across it again in another secondhand bookshop and bought it again because I know that I'll want to read this sometime in the future of my life, and so I wanted to have it again. And then this one is kind of applying the goddess myths to psychology. So kind of trying to relate archetypes of women to women, and sharing these stories to help women to find empowerment through these goddess images. So that's what that one is. Okay. Next, we have another one of my favorite novels, The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, and I also have In the Skin of a Lion and Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. So I have read these two. I read this from in a different version. I read the version with the movie cover, the movie tie-in cover, and then I gave that to my mom to read, and then I thought, I have to own a copy of that book. It's one of my favorite novels. I need to have one. So I purchased this edition. And then these are a different edition, but they match each other. So I still haven't read Anil's Ghost. I've read In the Skin of the Lion, really enjoyed it. Michael Ondaatje is definitely a writer that vibes well with me. I love his very poetic lyrical style, which I know bothers some people, but it really, I get along quite well with it. So okay, we're getting down the list here. I have 3 Audre Lorde books. The first one is her collection of poetry, The Black Unicorn, which I read not this past Black History Month, but the previous one. I liked several of these poems. I don't necessarily know if Audre Lorde's poetry vibes with me super well. I think her style is very, I don't know, it just wasn't something that I grasped the first time, but I did get the selected works of Audre Lorde, which was edited and has an introduction by Roxanne Gay. This is a book that came out, I believe, in 2019 or 2020. I'm not sure. And, you know, I really love Roxanne Gay. She went through Audre Lorde's works and created this anthology. So I'm very excited to read through more of Audre Lorde's work and kind of see it in a collection that Roxanne Gay put together, and see if there's somehow more of a connection for me with her poetry. And then I also own Zami, A New Spelling of My Name, which is a biomythography by Audre Lorde. So this is her personal biography, memoir version of her life. So yeah, very excited to read this in future as well. I have The Birth House by Amy McKay. And Amy McKay is she was born in the United States but now lives in Nova Scotia. Authored This Is her most famous novel. I read it many, many years ago, and I borrowed it from my mother, and I would like to read it again. There's actually newer works of Amy's that I've read. I've actually read all of her novels. And she also has a memoir that came out a couple of years ago, which I haven't read yet. She writes just these stories that are so uplifting, very women-centered, and this story was actually based on the house she moved into in Nova Scotia. She found some old records or newspapers referencing a midwife that used to live in her house, and so that's where this inspiration for this story came from. So it's a great story. I would recommend anyone reading it. All right, so the last 2 piles are quite different from each other. We'll say that. Okay, so Starhawk is a neo-pagan Wiccan writer based out of San Francisco, and I consider myself to be a spiritual person that connects with the earth spirituality. And so that's what these books are about. This one is a huge, pivotal book in 1970s earth goddess spirituality movement. it's, you know, again, another life-changing book for me. And then this one's called Dreaming the Darks, Magic, Sex, and Politics by Starhawk. And this is a wonderful nonfiction. It breaks down a lot of the power dynamics between men and women and between people, and how, you know, sex and politics forms our identities and kind of, you know, pigeonholes us into the beliefs that we have around our life. So it's a really great book if you want to break down some of the societal norms that are inside of you that you may not even realize you have. But Starhawk also writes fiction, and she has a trilogy that is one of my favorites. So this Fifth Sacred Thing was was the first book in the series. It is a future utopian world, based in the area around San Francisco. The United States has been divided into this kind of free, collectively living earth spirituality, open to everyone, trying to live sustainably on the earth group. And then there's another group that lives in the south of San Francisco, who are militant, and they're trying to control the world, and they have very rigid gender roles and very rigid militant ways of being. And so this story takes place in that world. And so this is the first book. You follow Maya, who is this amazing matriarch in this society, leader who is helping the people get through. And then you have this one that came next, which is Walking to Mercury, which is the prequel to the Fifth Sacred Thing. And this one is about Maya when she was younger. So when she was growing up in the, like, around the 1960s, and she was a hippie, and she was an anti-war activist, and she was all these things. So this is her pre-story. And then City of Refuge is the sequel to the Fifth Sacred Thing. So this follows Maya's descendants as they are battling against this regime and trying to do it in a way that is essentially nonviolent and essentially breaking the systems that are oppressing people. So these books are really revolutionary. They have amazing ideas, and they push your brain to think beyond the reality that we're in right now, to think about what could be if we all tried to dream it together. So they're very, very inspiring in that way, especially in the current times, the things that are going on right now. Okay, so my last pile here is my Margaret Atwood pile. My feelings around Margaret Atwood have evolved a lot since I started reading her when I was in my early 20s. I am not against her, but I also feel that she has misstepped a lot in the last few years in terms of her voicing her opinions about things, and she's definitely failed in terms of creating an open dialogue around Indigenous literature and around how society is moving. And it is frustrating for me because I think she has the capacity to be a very revolutionary thinker, but she's very much limiting her thought to an area that I just can't get down with her, the way she's been tweeting things and stuff like that. So I feel kind of, I'm less passionate about her as a writer than I was when I was younger. That being said, I still own many of her books, and I still want to read a lot of the ones I haven't read yet, or reread a few. Lady Oracle, I read when I was 19, and it's about a woman who's a mom who's struggling with her life, and I think it totally went over my head, and so I want to reread it because I think I would relate to it a lot more now if I'm going to relate to it. The Handmaid's Tale I had to read for school, I believe, and obviously this is a classic. It's probably her most famous novel. I think it has some interesting ideas and some beautiful scenes. It's definitely not my favorite of hers. Life Before Man is one of her earlier novels. I have not read this one yet. I'm only keeping it because, again, I think I would like to read most of her novels. The Robber Bride is what I think is my favorite of her novels. I thought it was Cat's Eye, and then I reread Cat's Eye a few years ago and realized that all of the things that I thought happened in Cat's Eye didn't happen in Cat's Eye. And so I think they happen in The Robber Bride, but I have not reread it yet. So someday I will, and then I'll see if that's true. This is Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad. Obviously, this is the myth of Penelope and Odysseus, as told from Penelope's perspective. I did read it. I don't really remember it. So I think I probably will reread it at some point. Bodily Harm by Margaret Atwood. This is another one that I have not read. So I picked it up at a garage sale a few years ago, and eventually I will read this one. Okay, so the last three are ones that I've read. These are Oryx and Crake and The Year of the Flood. These ones are part of the trilogy. She did a trilogy of dystopian futures. And I don't remember what the name of the series is. I think there is a series name, but I can't remember what it is right now. So these two are part of that series. I don't think I'll ever reread these, to be honest with you. They were not my favorites of hers. I think one of my issues with her writing and why I don't connect with it on the same level that I connect with Margaret Lawrence's work is because she's much more about ideas and concepts than she is about emotion. And so I just didn't connect with them that well. And then Alias Grace is probably my second favorite of her novels. This is an amazing story. It's based on a true story of a woman who was accused of murder and went to trial in Upper Canada, I believe, so before Canada became Canada. And there was a brilliant miniseries created around this, directed by Sarah Polley, and it was fantastic. So this story is one of her best. So if you wanted to pick one to read, I would recommend this one. And I did read the latest novel of hers I read a few years ago was Surfacing, and I thought Surfacing was also very good. So if I did come across Surfacing at a secondhand bookshop or something, I might purchase a copy to keep, because I could see myself potentially rereading it in the future sometime. And some of these Margaret Atwoods I will get rid of. And they're just, again, it's just because, sometimes you grow away from authors, and you grow away from their perspectives. And I probably will not read the Testaments by her. I have no desire to revisit those characters or that world. It's just too bleak for me, especially right now. It's just, there's nothing that I feel like I would get out of that story. So that is my second reading through my shelves, my favorites shelf. And let me know if you've read any of these, or if you're interested in any of them after hearing me talk about them. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.